The following is intended for mature audiences only. Discretion is advised.
Thank you so much for downloading this episode of So What Do You Really Do, the podcast where I, your host, Dennis Maller, talks to artists and entertainers about their day jobs. And the artist and entertainer on the podcast today is comedian, actress, and historian Dawn Brodey. And I'm just going to get it out of the way right now because I'm not the one who brought it up. I wasn't even going to mention it, but Dawn did. So therefore, it's open game. And as the COVID pandemic, she's the first one to mention COVID because she is, of course, a pandemic friend. I know you're waiting for that, for me to say that. You're waiting for that to come out. Dawn is, like many of my guests on the podcast, is somebody that I met during the COVID pandemic lockdown, where I did a lot of Zoom and Google Hangouts and YouTube and Instagram shows, all from my podcast studio here in Boston, where I spent majority of my lockdown time because I, like many people, was unemployed and didn't really have anything that I could go do but comedy and meet new people. And Dawn is one of them. She's a fantastic, hilarious comedian and an amazing historian. She has a podcast called HILF that we'll get into. History I'd Like to Fuck with Dawn Brodey. That is the name of the podcast. And if you're a longtime listener, you actually may be even familiar with her podcast before, because right around the time that I was coming onto the Big Comedy Network, as they were bringing me into the fold for their new network, Dawn was launching her podcast, and she is one of the people that I reached out to and said, hey, let's do cross-promotional ads for each other's podcasts. And of course, Dawn was on board for it. She did some really great promotions for my podcast. I did some really good, funny reads for her podcast that she wanted me to read in her, the way that she wanted them, and said, it is not something I continue to do, only for the fact of it's a lot of work reaching out to people and trying to schedule these things. And I kind of hope that the network would have taken over doing that, and that we would be just send me a read to go, hey, record this and put it in your podcast, promoting other podcasts on the Big Comedy Network. That is not where we're at yet. By the way, Dawn is not on the Big Comedy Network. She is on a network, and it's been killing me this whole time. The Den, the name of the podcast network that brought her podcast on is called The Den. I just finally now realized that. I've been trying for a week now, trying to remember the name of it. But she is on the podcast to talk about not just her podcast, but something her and I have a common interest in, and that is being tour guides. That's why I want to bring her in. I'm hoping to be talking to more tour guides. I should probably also bring on people from the Boston Duck Tours on there. Let me let you in on a little secret on what was a thought to happen last year. I had dreams. And for those who don't know, if you're joining us for the first time, thank you so much for listening to the podcast or for watching it. You can, of course, no matter what platform you're watching or listening on right now, there are other platforms. If you want, you can watch the podcast on YouTube at Big Comedy Network. And of course, you can always listen on every single podcast app that you listen to podcasts on: Apple, iTunes, and Spotify, and Google, if that's even still around anymore. I don't even know what's going on with the Google one. Stitcher, if that's also still around. I think Stitcher also died out too. The only thing you can't listen on is Patreon, because I don't want to take money from people. If you want to send me money, Venmo link in the bio. No, I'm not going to put my Venmo link of @DeaderDennis. Wow, that'd be so tacky to put a link to my Venmo @DeaderDennis in there so you can send me money. Don't send me money. By the way, speaking of money, I guess I told this a couple episodes, but let's reiterate. I guess I'm going to do cameos. I don't know. I'm not actually on the Cameo platform, but as most of you know, I am a narrator for Boston Duck Tours. They are military amphibious replica vehicles that drive around through the city of Boston and into the Charles River, giving scenic, historic, comedic tours of Boston. And I had a couple of people who were on my tour last year, and they were celebrating their anniversary and asked me to reach out and give them a little shout out because they loved my tour so much, and it's such an integral part of their relationship that I wrote a song for them. So I guess I do that now. So if you want a custom bad ukulele punk rock song about something special, I don't know, reach out to me. We'll see what we can do. But we are, as a tour guide, I want to bring in other tour guides. So here was the thing last year. While I was in training, I had this grand dream of bringing all of my classmates onto the podcast to give us a brief. What were you doing before Duck Tours? How did you hear about Duck Tours? And how was your first season? There's 14 of us. I'm not going to do 14 episodes on that. I was like, I could do in chunks. Let's do 3 5-person episodes, and each segment's 10 to 15 minutes. That should be good podcast. It was so much work. And the fact that I don't have people come in the studio, we're all working different schedules. I was like, I'll wait till the end of the season. And then by the time the end of the season came, I was like, I don't want to talk to any of them. We've all said what we wanted to say about our first season to each other. Why bring recordings in? So that never happened. But for the very, very long time listeners, there is a lost secret episode of the So What Do You Really Do podcast where we had a secret Boston Duck Tour narrator on the show. And that episode no longer exists. Ooh, spooky mysteries. Ooh, detective stories. All right, anyway. So I wanted to bring Dawn on so she can talk to me about her experience with being a tour guide, because she did tourism in the Twin Cities area. And of course, she worked at Universal Studios in LA, where she resides now. She is originally born in Wisconsin, Minneapolis, Minnesota comedian that now resides in Los Angeles. And she was a Mary Shelley impersonator for a one-woman show at the Electricity Museum out in Minneapolis. She was a tour guide on a tour bus going around the city of St. Paul. And of course, like I said, she worked at Universal Studios. So she has a lot of different experiences that are also similar to mine, where I'm a UK Lee, my Boston Duck Tours character, where I'm dressed in a costume and doing silly jokes and characterizations. So she had experience with that, and I wanted to hear what her experiences were. And it's a great, fascinating talk. I really enjoyed it. Dawn is her podcast. If you know me, I'm not a historian. I don't care about history. I learned enough history to do my duck tour jokes. That's basically what I'm in it for, right? And I've become a fan of some of history, and I'm constantly looking up historic facts and new things. But listen to her podcast and her love and her passion for the historic events that she researches, and the way that she's able to bring them to life, and how funny and relatable the way that she narrates these stories on her podcast, HILF, really drew me in. And I enjoyed listening to her. Like, her as a personality is absolutely fun and energetic, which is similar to me with energy. I don't know about fun. Some people apparently don't have fun with my energy, but those aren't the people who are listening to the podcast, hopefully. But if you're, by the way, listening and or watching the podcast, please also, this is the call to action, as we call it. Ugh, I hate these buzzwords. Here's the call to action. If you're listening to this episode because you're a longtime listener, leave a comment, leave a like, share it with a friend. If you're coming to this podcast for the first time and you like it, please subscribe, like it, give it 4 stars, leave a comment or a review, and please tell a friend about it, because this is not just for me, it's for the guests. This is the way the business works. iTunes is not recommending you podcasts because they think this podcast is right for you. Popularity begets more popularity. The more popular, the more reviews, the more listens a podcast has, the more likely iTunes and Spotify are going to share it with other people. And the more people that get to listen to the podcast, are more people who get to listening to who my guests on the podcast are. So if you came here because you're a big fan of someone who is on the podcast, please help them. Help me help them. Leave a like, share it, leave a comment. The comments really do help. It's all part of their system. However the almighty algorithm works out is beyond me, but there are things that we know that they do that help. So there's the call to action. Now, the other call to action is that you sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with comedian, actress, and historian, Dawn Brodey. I do want to bring up an issue. Were you just recently here in Boston?
I was. Yes. I was there visiting my sister.
Yeah, you have a sister who lives there. I remember, I think it was the Boston Massacre episode of the podcast. You were talking about your sister, and I was like, oh, now I have to try and trick her sister into taking my duck tour.
Oh, you don't have to trick her. My sister is very much like me, which means we join things. We say yes, and we join things.
Perfect. Well, all right. Let's get into it. We got a lot to talk about because
I'm so excited.
I am because all right. So let's the reason why this is exciting for me is because as a new duck tour narrator, I started last season. It's my second season with them. It's a new world to me. So I'm taking so much enjoyment in talking to people who are also working in the space of tour guides and tourism.
Yeah.
And hearing their side of things, because there's so many different things between what I do and what other people do and what other people do and go back. So let's just jump right into that because the problem with the good or the bad of the duck tours is, and I'm just going to use this to relate to getting to you because I feel like maybe you can relate, or maybe it's super different, is that we are characters, right? Mm-hmm. We're zany, goofy, dressed people who are not using our real names, and I am to the nth degree so much of a character. My character, UK Lee, which is a ukulele playing punk rocker, which is also doesn't actually sound like that much different than what I actually am. But
yeah, I thought you said you were playing a character.
Yeah. But it is like it's not genuine Dennis. Like it's not Dennis. It's UK Lee. It's a different thing. And you you've played characters at tour museums too. Is that? Were you drawn to that because of the history or because the acting, you get to play a character? Like, is that what drew you to that?
Well, really, Dennis,
the question
it's both.
What drew you into, I'll let you answer the question that I continue to keep asking.
Well, it's a great question because it's really both. And it's really what I've always been most attracted to is how I can find a way for history and theater to hold hands. And the fact is, what's actually difficult about that dynamic is how to separate them. I mean, history has story in the name. Do you know what I mean? And the very nature of studying history is so much like fiction because it requires us to go to a place that isn't real. That it was once real is aside from the fact that no one here was there. Right? So now occasionally when you're talking about a living history, then you can. But even so, for example, you talk about 9/11. People are like, I was there. You're like, yes, but you're harnessing memory. And memory is very much like fiction. There are gaps. There was only one person's perspective, which was yours, which means there can be errors, which means that story and fiction and metaphor and fantasy are always going to play a part in it, right? And I think that sometimes historians, because that sounds like we're making it up, because if you're being cynical, it sounds like, oh, right, so what you're saying is there's no such thing as real or what is fact or, something like that. But I think that it's not. I think history loses its thread when it tries to be too much like a science. And less like a storytelling of, two friends who are recalling high school. You're not going to say one of them recalled high school correctly and the other one recalled high school incorrectly because they both had totally different experiences of high school. You know what I mean? And so to your question, have been, let's see if I can remember. I will probably forget one, but I was a tour guide through St. Paul, Minnesota on the gangster tours. And I played a character. I played George Machine Gun Kelly's wife, Kitty Kelly, and I wore a blonde wig and I carried a Thompson submachine gun. And I wore a little red dress and high heels and fishnet stockings. And what was so fun about that was that I sounded so stupid, and I acted really dumb, but I knew fucking everything. You know what I mean? And so it was a fun character to play.
I could not do that. Everyone tried to get me to do a British accent so I could be like a British punk rocker on my tour. And I'm like, I'm not doing that for 80 minutes. Absolutely not.
Because it's hard, right? Exactly. So that was one where it was history and acting, and that was like one of the first ones. Similarly, at that same location, I would lead tours through the caves themselves. There was like a Prohibition gangster era cave. I was also a tour guide at the Bakken Museum, which was the same museum where I created and performed a one-woman show as Mary Shelley. For the author of Frankenstein, of course, but separate from that job, the Mary Shelley job, I would also occasionally function as a tour guide, and I would meet groups of grade school students or any kind of visiting tourist who was curious about the museum, and I would take them on a 45-minute tour, helping them demonstrate, some of the experiments that we had. There, I wasn't really playing a character, and yet, Dennis, I'm sure you'll appreciate that you are always kind of playing a character when you're on stage. You might not be UK punk rock, crazy clothes, radical character that anyone would recognize this person as playing a character. But like, I'm not saying fuck to the group of school students. You know what I mean? I'm pretending to, you're still having to inject a bit of maybe artificial enthusiasm or curiosity in order to bring them, to that curiosity.
As studio comedians, I always say that comedians are the amplified versions of themselves on stage.
100%.
So I feel like if you're doing your tour, you're a little more amplified person. Somebody, who was it that recently? Oh, the previous episode, I had this young Bree Crabtree, who is a clown and performer. Mm-hmm. And she was talking about that she has too many incidents where she drops into an announcer voice, or I called it Carney voice. Mm-hmm. It's like, attention, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be getting the clown show started in just a few minutes. She's like, why do I do that voice? And I was like, it's the same reason when I host trivia, that every question gets asked in this timbre of voice.
And you know what? People who aren't even on stage get it, because you have that voice with your mom. You have a different voice for your children. You have a different voice for your best friend. Like, we all do that. You know what I mean? To an extent. And like, when I was a tour guide here in Los Angeles on the Universal Studios backlot, I was one of the tram tour guides through there, right? And that is to your, it's like, it was one of the first times I was giving tours of a place that wasn't kind of quote unquote boring. Like, I never found any place I toured boring. Clearly, I was like a huge fan of the caves and the Science Museum and the Bakken Museum and all these places. But I knew that I had to kind of turn it on, because there was probably a certain percentage of people that were walking in there being like, oh my God, fucking kill me. I cannot believe I have to go on a tour of this boring ass, fucking museum. And so I would kind of try to, no, this isn't going to be boring at all. I'm going to really make this a great day for you, Where at Universal, it was like a totally different deal, because it's like, I don't have to do a tap dance excitement to get you stoked about seeing the courthouse square from Back to the Future, or seeing that The Rock just walked by our tram, So it was almost like the opposite. Like, I almost had to find a way of being like, this is a working movie studio, and like, you guys have the enthusiasm, and my job is just to sort of be your conscientious guide who isn't totally starstruck by this stuff, who can totally navigate through here like it's just a day at work. And yeah, I love it. I just think it's cool, and I applaud you for doing it. And like, the people who take your tours, I'm sure, are better for it.
I love that you did Dan LaFontaine voice when you're like, welcome to the movie studio.
Yeah,
that's the guy.
Right?
Yeah.
Movie phone.
The movie voice guy.
Yeah.
All right, well, okay, here's the difference between me, other tour guides, and you. Is I fucking hate history.
oh God, right through the heart. This interview is over.
Here's the thing. I've learned enough about, by the way, I do love your podcast. I love listening. And this is why I love your podcast, is your enthusiasm. Like, I know, when I joined the Big Comedy Network, we reached out. I was like, hey, we both have podcasts. Let's promote each other's podcasts. And then I went and listened to your podcast. I was like, history podcast, whatever. Dawn's funny. She's fine. And I listened. I was like, oh, I like listening to Dawn tell her stories. That's what I love. And honestly, not going to lie, there's a lot of you influenced into me for my character at Duck Tours. Because I literally, last year when I was training, I had to figure out how I can be the comfortable version of me telling jokes in this character and making it fun for other people. Mm-hmm. I naturally just tried to latch onto a lot of things that you do with your podcast, in that a lot of this podcast, I think it's just going to be me complimenting you.
Oh, that fills my heart. It means a lot to me, Dennis. Thank you.
I love you take dramatic license with yours, which gets me in a lot of talking to from people when they're like, well, I get a lot of actuallys from my other tour guides. I'm like, relax. I'm surmising and I'm giving dramatic license. Like I'm embellishing a little bit for the theatrics of everything that we're doing here.
That's right.
Nothing I'm saying is incorrect.
Word.
Yeah.
Word. It's a thin line to walk. It's an important line to walk, but it is. It's sort of like when you're like, when the King of England was like, hell no. Sometimes you need to just like give people the thrust of it. And they're like, of course he wouldn't have said hell no. And you're like, shut up.
Or I talk about the Charles River, with how it got its name. It's like young Prince Charles. They wanted to rename it. Young Prince Charles goes, name it after me, Daddy. Call it the Charles River, Daddy. Do it now, Daddy, now. Very Veruca Salt from Willy Wonka.
Great.
Well, and the reason I came up with that version, because A, it's funny, but two, is because the other tour guys kept saying, the King James asked his son Prince Charles to name whatever he wanted, he can name after him. He goes, I want to name the biggest thing in Massachusetts after me, Daddy, called the river the Charles River. I'm like, neither of these are any more accurate than the other, but one is definitely more fun than the other.
Yeah. And what? Sometimes if I felt like I had a snob, I would say, because you already have perfect creative license to say it however you want. But if you really feel like you need an excuse, I say, I like to imagine it went like this. And then usually that takes the wind out of the sails of people who feel the need to tell you that they wouldn't have said it that way.
Yeah, there's a line on the tour where it's like, that's how I pictured the conversation going.
Exactly.
So which was your first tour guide job? Was it the Gangsters?
I think, let me see. Yeah, I think my first official tour guide job was, the Wabasha Street Caves in St. Paul, Minnesota, which if you're ever there, run, do not walk. It is such a great place. It's right along the Mississippi River, which is a great place to hang out anyway. And the thing among the things that makes these caves cool is that they aren't naturally occurring caves. So if you're kind of picturing in your mind like a Goonies, down by the shoreline, kind of open air to the water kind of deal, it's not like that. It's actually up in the sandstone cliffs along the river. And the reason the caverns are there is because it was a silica mine. So they had basically dug into the front of the cliff these circular holes and then took out the fine sand and made it into glass. That was kind of its original deal. But what was left behind were these just huge hollowed out caverns on the side of a sandstone cliff.
Oh,
and various nefarious things happened in there when it was just a hole in a cliff. But then during Prohibition, they secretly built a nightclub inside that, Dennis, is like champagne fountain, gorgeous bar, huge arching ceilings, stage, dance floor. But it looks like just a hole in a cliff until you walk in, and then there's this like gobsmacking reveal, and you can still get married there and have your events there. And it's just like, who wouldn't want to go in there?
Well, I got into duck tours because other comedians got in the job. They get a referral bonus where people get hired. So they've been talking to me for years. And what finally made me do it is that I'm getting too old to crawl around the floor taping down microphone cables when doing AV work. So I was like, let me do the duck tours thing, right? Let's do this. I got into it because of a referral from a friend. Is that how you found the caverns, or was it one of the things like a school field trip and you're like, when I grew up, I want to be that person? Was there somebody who did a tour that when Dawn was a young girl that inspired you, like, I want to grow up to be a tour guide? How did you find that job? What attracted you to it? I think it was I was a theater history major in school. So it kind of seems obvious. Like the only thing I'm actually like, the only thing my degree really qualified me to do was an accurate historical portrayal of somebody. You know what I mean? Like, if you're really going to take all this money and time I spent on these stupid fucking degrees, that's like, she would be the best in a museum, performing in a museum, right? Like that just makes sense. You know what I mean? So I think it was just one of those, I can't pinpoint seeing a tour and thinking that's me, but good luck shutting me up. So great, qualified, right? I'm a know-it-all who loves to tell everybody whatever I know.
I have no stage fright, so give me that chance to get up there. I mean, I think it's honestly like good luck. Good luck keeping Dawn out of here. I would have made up the facts and pretended to have led a tour if they had not given me a script and told me the actual things I was supposed to say, you know. But yeah, I will say that for it's funny. Almost the opposite is true because was a tour guide at Universal. When I moved to LA, that was one of the first jobs I knew I would be a ringer for. I was like, I'm moving here. You know, I'm not union. I don't have an agent. I'm in my mid-30s. I'm cute, but I ain't hot. I can't sing. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of things I'm going to have to make up for if I'm going to try to make it out here in LA. And one of the arenas in which I thought, I know that I can knock this particular ball out of any given park is, can you lead tours? And so when I found out that there was a history/informational tour that was offered at Universal Studios, I was like, oh, give me that chance. And that was even an audition. That was, I think it was something like 500 or 600 people audition, and they hired 25. So it was still like, you know, you did have to do the thing, and I loved it so much. So that was one where, as soon as I realized that such a job was possible, I was like, where do I sign?
Yeah, I had a former comedian friend, not former, she's still a comedian friend, but former Bostonian now living in LA, Danielle Soto, who was also a Universal tour guide.
I love her. I know Danielle. She's great.
Danielle's great. And we had her on to talk about Universal Studios. And that does sound like a fun tour job, because honestly, if I there's no leaving duck tours for me and replacing it with a lateral move. Right. Like I don't have a CDL. I don't want to get one, so I can't drive the trolleys. I am not a regular historian tour guide. Like, I know a lot about history, but I don't know enough to be a history. I tell people all the time that I learned enough of the history just so I can write the jokes that you've heard.
Yes, that's great. That's all you need to know, man. Get a few punchlines.
But they're all so ingrained into the character because there's like so many movie or music stuff that I drop in along the way. But anyway, point being, and I mean, there's song cues and stupid shit like that. But anyway, point being.
It's great. It reminds me of like the Jungle Cruise at Disneyland. You know what I mean? Like, that would be... Like, I would still find ways to throw in stupid history, but it is just like punchline, pun, and I am here for it. I love it.
Yeah. So, all right. I think Universal, my life plan, it's 43. I'm 43. Let's see how well this life plan goes. But
you're a baby.
The leaving here is to go to LA. You know, when unlike you, I am union, but I'm also $4,000 in debt to them. So,
yeah. Oh, I'm union now. I made it eventually, but coming in, boy, woo.
Yeah. When I moved to LA, the next plan is to move to LA and, get caught up with the union, move to LA.
Yeah.
If I need to do a job, I'm going to go to Universal Studios. Just from talking to the people who are doing it, it sounds like it's a job that's within my skill sets enough to where I can make a living and get by and actually not feel like I have to want to, find out how much weight my new ceiling fans in the Oakwood Estates can support.
Word. And they also, like, it's just a great community too. You know what I mean? Like, everybody who's doing the job is often fresh in town, or they've been here for a few years. You start to find, this tour guide's making a movie, you know what I mean? It's a great way to network and start your path, make your first batch of best friends in a new town,
So one of the things that I have found difficult with my job, and this is, see if you can relate, is the people who are not on board for the character. Because some people I think sometimes Duck Tours is at least the Boston Duck Tours is a victim of their own success, in that people know that it's so synonymous with Boston and many other cities, but Boston is the largest company and the second oldest company. You being from Wisconsin know the oldest company, the Dells.
Oh, Wisconsin, God, I love the Duck Tours. They're so much fun. Oh my God.
But the people don't know what they're in store for. So they were like, we're in Boston. We got to go do a duck tour. And they get on a boat, and then they see someone dressed in a goofy costume and puns and conduct tour. And they're like, didn't sign up for this. For you, who was a historic performer, at museums. Did you find that similar, and where certain people are like, oh, I came here for history. I didn't come here for whatever all this is.
Yeah.
Or the people that be like, oh, just drop the Mary Shelley thing and just talk to us normal. Was that an issue you ever had to deal with, and how did you deal with it? 'Cause I could use the advice.
Yeah. I guess if so, honestly, I'm so oblivious that it didn't occur to me that like anybody wouldn't be just like loving everything that I'm doing. But I think part of it is maybe where the theater stuff comes in handy, in the sense that before I did tour guiding officially, I was in a ton of improv and interactive comedy. So I was in Tony and Tina's Wedding, which if you've never seen it is an interactive Italian wedding where part of the show is scripted, but a majority of the show is audience interaction in character. And I played Connie, who's the pregnant maid of honor, and she's huge and pregnant, and she's kind of a ball buster, right? And I was getting people up to dance, and that was a tricky character because she's abrasive. So you have to fall in love with someone and want to play with someone that is kind of rude. And so the way that I always tried to make that work was that Connie's a bitch, but not to you. So my improv would always be like, hey, there you are. Oh my gosh, you're gorgeous. Do you know what I heard about Becky? Or like, it's you and me are against the world, was sort of the way I would approach everybody, right? So that they felt like they were sort of in on it. And that was a tricky. And once I kind of got that down and felt like I had found some success with that in the show, because you would find that, a lot of times people are coming with their whole family to shows like that. And often one person loves Tony and Tina's Wedding and loves being pulled up on stage and loves interactive comedy, but they brought Uncle Mark. And they brought cousin, who just hates this shit, was dragged here, was told they had to go. And you can often spot that person, right? And there's a lot of different approaches, man. Some people will say that you got to really work them. You go after that person because everybody loves to watch the heel. That's not my approach. I generally try to move around them. You know what I mean? Not like avoid them, but to make them comfortable, to try to let them know right away, vocally and physically, I'm not going to make this a rough night for you. Like, I see you and I get this, but like, there is a place to have fun. I sit sometimes next to those people of quiet comedy, where we're not drawing a light on our, trying not to pull them out, trying not to force them to do something. But then the other thin line is sometimes you see people in those environments who do desperately want to be played with, who really want to be pulled up and mocked and laughed, but they're so shy. They really need you to do that work. So sometimes your job as a performer in that arena is to try to spot the difference between someone who's like, I will fucking kill you if you try to get me to do the limbo, and someone who's like, pick me, but don't. And I think that maybe after a lot of years of doing that prior to coming to tour guiding, whether I was always conscious of it or not, I liked to think that I had sort of a sense about the different ways to approach various audience members, because then you also have the overly enthusiastic, the ones who are like, I want that microphone. I want to dominate your time. I want to show you how much I get this. And so you sometimes have to do a little bit of plate spinning, right? with all the various energies. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the good thing about things like Tony and Tina's Wedding is, even though it's interactive and the show goes for a while, you have a moment, you have a backstage where you can be like, oh, this guy. Oh, yeah. All right, let me go back out there and get it. Like, you have a moment away. For 80 minutes, we're all stuck on a boat together. And that was my biggest fear. Yeah. Well, that was as a comedian, true. I can, if somebody comes at me and heckles me, I can destroy them. I can take them down and eviscerate them. But I know I'm not allowed to. I know I'm not supposed to. So that was the other problem, or the other concern when taking this job for me, was I'm stuck with this person for 80 minutes with 33 other people, and I don't have a moment of reprieve away from them. Will I be able to contain and I can't deal with them with the way that would make me feel better. So I have to learn how to deal with it within the constructs of the company's acceptable guidelines. And also, I don't have a reprieve. I don't have a moment where I can walk away and go like,
This guy, right? Okay, high fives. Let's get back out there. I don't have.
You know what's hilarious? Similar the gangster tour. When we were in the caves, you could have a reprieve. You could, if to your point, there was always somebody around, and it was a location, so you could change your route or whatever. But the bus tours, we would do gangster tours through the city of St. Paul, stopping at like where Ma Barker lived, where John Dillinger had a shootout. You know, so you drive around on this like coach bus, and I was on. So that was an hour and a half, 90 minutes tour, never stopped talking, never sat down. You know, so I'm going backwards on a moving bus with my microphone. Then we'd stop at a location. We'd get off on occasion. I think we got out of the bus like twice. I guess, you know what, the one person you do have is your driver, which I didn't really necessarily like. There were always someone different, but you'd get familiar with them over time. And that was one where, I mean, I guess at risk of sounding like a real, I was probably just so oblivious, Dennis, that if there were people that were like, I hate this bitch, I can't stand this voice, I don't know why I signed on to this tour, then I have to applaud their generosity of spirit in not throwing it in my face or making me aware of it, you know.
Well, I mean, sometimes that's, you know, there's nothing wrong with it. There is the people who can, like sometimes as comedians, we focus in on the one person not laughing.
Sure.
And some of us can just focus in on the people who are enjoying themselves and having fun.
Sure.
So it's nice that it seemed to be in at least a well enough mental place where you can, you know, and I'm not a doctor, but we talk openly about mental health on the podcast. But you're at least in a mental health place well enough to where you're like, oh, it's his problem, not mine, that he doesn't like the tour. Whereas me internally go, why doesn't he like me?
Sure. Like listen, me. I got my own, I have my insecurities and my own mental health issues, but I will say that I have never generally suffered from being like, I'm pretty sure everyone's having a good time. I think this is fun, right? You know, I mean, if I'm going to lay up at night wondering like what I did wrong all day, I can give myself a list, but I guess, I've never come back to that one. Usually I'm like, I think the tour was good though. You know, that person behind me in line at the grocery store, they thought I was a bitch, but that bus, they loved me.
So when you wrote the one woman Mary Shelley, history, can we call it a play? Is that fair?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. It's a one-woman show.
Mm-hmm. For the Backham Museum. How did that come about? Because you have a degree in history, you have a degree in theater. Yeah. Was it a grants program? Were they looking for somebody specific? Was it a referral? How did that fall into your lap? And I only say it as, how did it come across to you? Not as in a way. I mean, you're well deserving of it.
You know, thank you so much. No, it is one of those, right, where it seems so perfect. You're like, wow, how did it happen? I graduated from the University of Minnesota, go Gophers, with the theater and history degree in June of 2001. And you may recall that in September of 2001, there was an incident in New York. Mm-hmm.
Was there in New York?
And so that
something in DC.
Just a few, And you know, everyone's got their own shit. You know, every generation, everyone's individual lifetime. You know, we talk about these the kids who missed their senior year of high school and their freshman year of college in lockdown, and like what that's going to do to like a certain generation. You know, World War II, like there's these times where you sort of look at like what young people were going through and how that affected them as they started their professional and financial and lives with this like historical moment sort of around them. And for me, the way professionally that 9/11 became a real impact was that in June of 2001, when I graduated from college with a theater history degree, that was a really reasonable degree to get. That was even in Minneapolis, St. Paul. You know, I told you I was in Tony and Tina's wedding, and that happened a little later, but it was a real happening town. Like it is the town where they shot Beautiful Girls and Mighty Ducks and A Simple Plan and Grumpy Old Men. You know, that like late 90s, early aughts, it was like a hotbed for film. And a lot of people
I don't even think of those areas as that.
I know, right?
Fascinating to hear.
And it was also Jesse Ventura had been governor. And so a lot of those like film tax stuff had come through town. And so in the commercial and the film and television arena, there was a real mortgage paying like lifestyle you could live. And the theaters there were the same. The Guthrie is an internationally known, union theater. And there were a lot of other theaters in town that paid a living wage. This can be your full-time job here, man. Right. And my professors in theater, were all working. They're not those who can't teach kind of teachers. They were often missing class because they were on tour and active working professors. So that was the deal. And one of the things that happened after 9/11 was that all that shit stopped, right? Not entirely, not quite like it stopped in lockdown during COVID, but budgets, and how we paid for things and how the municipalities and individuals were going to the arts changed drastically. And not only did theaters close and the film and television industry left Minneapolis, certainly. I mean, I think it was impacted probably everywhere, but those like small little markets that were popping up regionally seemed to dry up very quickly. Or if they didn't dry up, it became so competitive that a brand new college graduate is going to have a harder time. It just became a different landscape fast. And so one of the things that I did was look hard for a way to not have to stop acting, to not have to, after September of 2001, abandon everything I had thought I was going to do and all the wonderful ideas I had. You want to hear an example? A buddy of mine who graduated with me had just opened a very cool improv theater in the Atlanta airport. Dennis, do you remember before 9/11, you could go to the airport and hang out, right? You'd go with your friend and you walk them to the gate and you'd have lunch and you'd shop in the cool airport shops and stuff like that. And so she had opened a really cool small improv theater in the Atlanta airport, so that people who had an hour or two in between flights and whatever could go. So that felt, those sort of things. It was just like, oh God. And as luck, if there's such a thing, in this kind of conversation, is that the Bakken Museum in Minneapolis, which was founded by Earl Bakken, who's the founder of Medtronic and the inventor of the battery-operated pacemaker. He specifically wanted a Frankenstein exhibit in his museum because he was inspired to become a scientist because of the movie Frankenstein, which he saw when he was like 8 years old. And he was probed in from that movie to wonder about electricity and medicine and how we can apply electricity to the human body to make it better. I mean, it's fascinating, right? So they were just sort of looking for someone who could cross that boundary. And they literally, this was again back in the day, 2001, it was a newspaper ad. It was a classified for someone to create a theater piece on Mary Shelley at the Bakken Museum. And boy, howdy, was I, as a theater graduate in 2001, looking through the classifieds, baby. And anybody that put any classified that had the word act or theater or play in it, I was going to circle and highlight because please, 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 And so it was a need meets need makes whole kind of scenario, and I've really never looked back.
Well, this is congratulations. You have a first on the podcast, and I think you're the first person to talk about how, because the whole podcast is about day jobs.
Yeah.
Talk to a lot of people about jobs. You might be the first person to mention they got their job from finding it in the classified section of the newspaper.
A printed paper, baby. Boy, talk about history.
Oh my God. I remember doing that right around the same time. So I was, in 2000, when 9/11 happened, I just turned 20, 2001, 81. Yeah, I just turned 20. And just after 9/11, I lost my apartment, had to move back with my parents for a little while. And I remember going through the classified ads myself, looking for a new job and seeing, no experience estimate, knife salesman. And I was like, oh yeah, let me see what this is. And then
I can sell knives.
The number and they're like, oh, it's door-to-door sales? No, thank you.
No.
Cold calling? No, thank you. I'm 20 and I already realized this is a scam and terrible.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, there was this other thing that happened too. I mean, welcome to your friend Dawn. I'm always going to tie it to history, but I scraped and didn't live high on the hog. I lived in houseboats and shared attic apartments and stuff like that. But I paid my bills and made my living as an actress and a historian for about 15 years in the Twin Cities, not having to get a quote unquote real job. And I was really grateful for that. But one of the things that broke my heart was the recession in 2009. You know, the housing market and everything crashed. Now, that's, of course, 8 years after 9/11, right? So for 8 years, I had hammered together this life in acting and like made it work. And I watched people who were as talented, more talented than me, who could act circles around me in school, who had made a different choice in that 9/11 landscape where they were like, you know what, I was a good while less. I liked being an actor, but I got to get a real job. You know, I want a house, I want kids, I want insurance, I want a 401k. And so they kind of, with varying degrees of reluctance, threw up their hands and said, all right, I'll go and do the grind. And my heart broke for them the most in 2009 when they lost their houses anyway, and they got laid off with no help, because I thought, fuck, man, that was the deal though. Like, I'm going to live on sinking houseboats, and I'm going to continue to eat ramen into my 30s because I decided to circle the classified ads and to do history tours and be an actress. But like, those fucks sold you a guarantee. They said if you gave up your art, that you would be safe. And then they took, like, I was so devastated. And it was sort of a lesson I learned by osmosis in that moment in my life, which is you should always follow your bliss, because the safe route is never a guarantee. Like if you really think you can't live without your art, man, then do it, because the housing crisis, you're always a blip away, a COVID crisis away from them taking what they told you was this security and backed up, and everyone's going to make sure that you never go hungry again. It's like, oh, you can go hungry as an accountant just as fast as you can go hungry as an actress. You know what I mean?
I mean, it's so empathetic of you to have that feelings, which I think is what makes you such a good, relatable historian, is that you relate to the people that you're talking about, and you present it in such a way that other people can learn to relate to it. And that's also so inspiring to hear that think of things like, hey, even if I sell out and I become corporate America and I give up on my dream, there's still no guarantee that I'm going to be happy or that it's going to be as successful. So follow your happiness. And I'll also be the first to advocate for anyone who, especially comedians who are listening to this podcast, don't slug through it if you can't take it. If you're not finding joy in this, in your performing, it's okay to let the dream go and find another dream. Because there's people I talk about. There's people I've talked to who, after they quit, like, dude, all being a comedian did was make me upset all the time and nervous. And I'm happy that I don't have those nerves. I'm not that way. If I stop doing comedy, there is going to be no joy. You know, this is the end. Stand up and performing is the end game for me. I'll be doing it to the day I die, because I finally found the thing where I can be the me that I am. And earlier I said we are amplified versions on stage. No, the fake Dennis is this Dennis right here. This is the reserved Dennis. This is Dennis being palatable for human consumption, because he had to learn that over the years, that when I get on stage and I'm talking, or when I'm doing, the Zooms or on a camera still, this is the real me. This is where I get to release and let go and have myself. Same thing when I was on radio. Radio was 10, 15 second snippets of the real Dennis coming out, Yeah. Because I have to pull back, because the energetic Dennis that is my performance isn't... You can't take too much of it. It's good in small doses. It's too much for if I was that on all the time. But ultimately, at the end of the day, this is what I get my joy from, is finally getting to do those performances. And I there's plenty of comedians who are better than me. There was like, I'm miserable doing this. But if you're not miserable doing it in any way, and this is your joy, listen to Dawn and continue to keep following your joy.
Yeah, well, and also let the dream travel. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes I think we picture the arena in which our dream comes true, and we can be so dedicated that we become somewhat blind to the fullness of the dream. Like, and I get this too. Like, I've had people say to me that I would be a great history teacher. And I have been in a lot of classrooms, and I love education, and I love talking to kids, especially as a mom now. I like it even more because I have a very specific person. She's 6, my daughter is 6, so I love being the one who gets to introduce an idea to you and teach you about how something went and give you my interpretation is the first interpretation you hear. Like, I think that's really cool. And there's an element of performing that is a classroom teacher, that I would totally love. And I've allowed myself to consider, like, my God, have I been sort of like tricked into thinking I want to be an actress? Do I really want to be a teacher? Or is teacher another way for me to like flex within this dream that I have? And the reason I've never pursued education is because I don't care for the discipline. The role a teacher plays in a classroom full time is not the role that I want to play. What I'm great at, and I've done this many times, I still do occasionally, is I make myself available to teachers as an asset in their classroom. By all means, bring me in for an hour for one of your units. If you just want someone with tattoos and red hair who lets the word fuck slip to get their attention, to tell your students, introduce your students to The Great Gatsby. Or to introduce your students to Frankenstein, or to tell them a little bit about the Black Death. And then I can go, and I don't got great papers, and I don't have to talk to that bitch dad who doesn't want me to talk about politics or whatever the hell else I'd have to deal with as a teacher. But that being said, I do think there are people who would be the best teachers. But for some reason, if they've made the dream and they've painted the dream and they've made the diorama of their vision being Dave Chappelle on stage, selling out stadiums as a stand-up comedian, it feels like a demotion. It feels like a compromise. I'm just a teacher. And if you get stuck in that kind of mentality, then you are killing the dream because you're not allowing yourself to like let your heart jump at something and see that it's the same jump. You're on stage, you're changing lives, you're capturing attention, and if that's what the dream always was, then there has been no hierarchical move. It's just a fullness of realization. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I always get when people ask me why, you do interviews and, other people's podcasts, and you get the standard question, like, oh, you're a comedian. What made you want to become a comedian? Yeah. And I always say is that what I'm doing on stage is what I was doing at parties. Mm-hmm. Gathering people around and telling them stories, mm-hmm. and telling jokes and shucking and jiving and trying to get people's attention and trying to make them laugh. If I wasn't doing it on stage, I'm doing it to the cashier at the grocery store.
Right. Give me a healthy channeling of this desire of mine, please. Or these poor cashiers are just going to have to take it every time I come in, please. Yes. For their sake, give me a job.
Well, that's the thing. I can't go to the same store twice because I don't want to. I just need to keep repeating material. I don't want them to hear like you said that last time, Dennis. I was like, all right, well, don't work too hard. Bye.
Yeah, Tammy at the Food for Less has heard all my whole set. I gotta go to Ralph's. Dang it.
So so you answered this job to create this Mary Shelley show.
Yeah.
Was the love for Mary Shelley to write this play already something that you had in you, or did you discover your love for Frankenstein because you're like, oh, I can do this thing, let me research her, and then you fell in love with her? Which came first? Love for Mary Shelley?
The second. I had not read Frankenstein and did not know the story of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein until I got the job. That was definitely one where I had to sort of to get the job, I had to show that I was familiar with that landscape. So because I had a double major in theater and history, and I wanted to graduate in 4 years, which is tough to do with just one major. I had to do a little double dipping. And one of the things I did my senior year was I wrote a play about a real historic female pirate. I sort of I made an amalgamation of several different female pirates, but it was based in history. And so it was a full-length play called The Pirate Play. And that play...
I have those DVDs. Doesn't it star Jessie Jane and...
Yeah, it's hot. It's hot. Do not watch it at work. And it had to
highest
satisfy...
budgeted porn. $1 million budget porn. Okay.
It's true.
Sorry.
It's true. It has a sequel. I'm just saying.
By the way, I do want to just to derail for a second. I have a friend who works for a very popular, I'm not going to say the name of the company, puppet company. And it's the one you're thinking of.
Yes.
And been trying to get them on, but the problem is the person wants to come on, but the company won't let them because my podcast is not a family-friendly podcast. And I am doing everything I can to keep sinking my chances of getting them on the podcast.
It's tough. Yeah. Save Dawn Brodey single-handedly. Dropped too many F-bombs for you to get a good guest. God damn.
No, it's not you. It's the fact that I just, in the middle of your story of like, here's an educational play about theater. It's like, oh, is that the big budget $1 million porn movie that stars the one that recently passed away?
Pirates. Yeah. I've seen Pirates for pure artistic purposes, of course. And one of my favorite things, if you have not had the opportunity to see the biggest budget porn ever called Pirates, is that this gal, she's a porn star. It's obviously, so she's got the big fake tits, and but the premise is that she's a virgin being sort of,
you watched it with the sound on?
Who watches enough of the porn to follow the plot? But the point I was laughing at this thing was because she's like, what if I don't know what to do? And I was like, sweetheart, you've bleached your asshole. I have a feeling you're gonna figure out a way.
You to figure out where everything goes for this.
Yes. But no, I wrote the play I wrote in college was designed to satisfy both my professors in the theater department to say, yes, Dawn has written a good play, and my professors in the history department who can say, yes, Dawn has written a historically accurate play, or she has done the historic rigor and she is proving to us that blah, 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 that she's done our part. And that was really my senior project, was that play, because it finished my degrees and it satisfied both departments. So there was a very recent example that I could show the Bakken Museum, that even though I'm not immediately familiar with Frankenstein and Mary Shelley, that I can do the historic research sufficient to write you a good play that will be historically supported. And they took a chance on me.
Awesome. That is great. That sounds... to discover a thing that is so in your wheelhouse of stuff at young mid-20s-year-old person, that's so fascinating and great to hear. Because trust me, if you asked me to write something about I'm passionate about at 25, in my mid-20s, at 22, like I went to 6 years of community college and didn't graduate. My passion was punk rock music.
Yes.
We already had Boulevard of Broken Dreams by then. So
right, darn it, they swept you.
So you're working, through St. Paul. It's having this huge film renaissance while you're coming into the business of that. What inspired you to move to LA? Because I never even thought of St. Paul as to me, it's a major city in the Midwest, right? Or the central part of America. I've been East Coast my entire life. I think I have no thoughts or opinions about the middle of the country at all, unfortunately.
We know
there's big cities like Chicago. Chicago, Dallas, Houston. I think I had a layover in St. Paul once at the airport there.
Sure. You may have seen Purple Rain and then knew that had something to do with it. Yeah. Well, I'm this is what's so funny. Minneapolis, St. Paul are called the Twin Cities because they are virtually indistinguishable. And I say that as a resident of both Minneapolis and St. Paul over the years. It's very, very common that you would live in St. Paul, work in Minneapolis, go to college in Minneapolis, work in St. Paul. They're sort of competing cities in a good-natured neighbor sense, but for the most part, it's just the Twin Cities. And the Twin Cities taken together is comparable to the size and population of Chicago or Detroit. I'm sure people can email me if they'd like to give me their thoughts on this, but for the most part, Minneapolis compared to Milwaukee, Detroit, Chicago, just is a little bit more, likes to think they're more sophisticated, because it's the headquarters. It's not Motor City. It's 3M. It's, we these sort of like science, it's the Bakken Museum, it's General Mills versus like Motor City. I don't know. There was just sort of an element there that where these big theaters and huge museums and stuff would sort of tout this like being, do you know the cherry on the spoon sculpture and like this kind of stuff, right? We love Prince. But to me, Minneapolis, St. Paul, the Twin Cities was Paris, because I grew up in the middle of the woods in an unincorporated, like tiny farm town that was like we considered Wisconsin Rapids the city. And I guarantee you've never heard of Wisconsin Rapids. You know what I mean? We considered like Wausau, Marshfield, those were like the big cities because they had a Bed Bath & Beyond and a Perkins, But like, so when I went to college in Minneapolis, it was my big move. I didn't know anybody. I didn't go with any friends. I had two older sisters who both went to Madison, so I was going to a different school, than my sisters. It was a different state. It's about a 3.5-4 hour drive from where I'm from. So it's really, and this was before cell phones, And I really thought that was where I had made my move. From 18 as an adult, I made my move to the big city. And then I made it. And like I said, I didn't have a day job for 15 years. So I was also a working actor in a city I loved. And I lived on a houseboat on the Mississippi River, which was my dream. And I was in love with this awesome guy and who's also in the business. And this amazing guy says to me one day, let's go to LA. Right? And I was like, that's fucking dumb, dude, because I'm a big fish and I'm living my dream. And he said, okay, cool. So you're totally satisfied with this. And I was like,
he's seeding he's sowing the seeds of doubt in your brain.
Yeah. And I was like, well, I'm happy. I'm not unhappy, but I am not satisfied. I guess that's fair. And one of the things that possibly history has given me a flexibility in is not just looking back into the past, but I have somewhat of a better ability of looking forward, seeing the present as history, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. And I put myself in the future and I saw this and I thought, yeah, I mean, I can feel the edges of my professional life in the Twin Cities. If I get hired at the best theaters in town, I know what those 4 or 5 theaters are. I know the roles that I would get cast in. If a movie comes, if a TV show comes, I know the role I would get. And that's what I will get until I'm an old lady. And then I'll play the old lady in those things. Oh, shit. No, you're right. I'm not. Maybe I don't want to do this forever, And I thought, all right, well, I can give LA a year. Fuck it. I lived on a boat. So we got an RV and we rented out my boat and we moved out to LA in an RV. And I said, I can do anything for a year, And I thought I was the reluctant one and I thought I'd hate it. I thought LA is a city of artifice and ambition and I'm not going to like it. And I pulled into an RV park in Van Nuys, which if you live in LA, Van Nuys is it's not exactly glamorous. All right. And it took me about 2 weeks, Dennis, to realize that I loved LA. I was not reluctant. I wasn't like, if I can be famous, then it'll be okay. LA is a wonderful town. And I actually genuinely love it here. I love the people. The work is incredible. It's the deep end of the pool, baby. I mean, if you want to jump in with both feet and not worry about breaking your ankles, this is where you jump. I feel like I could wake up every morning. I could submit myself as an actor in voice, in theater, and on film. I could wake up at 5:30 in the morning and just self-submit myself for acting roles, for cool, awesome, sexy projects that I would love to get hired in. And I would run out of time before I'd run out of auditions. Doesn't mean I get all the auditions, but the work is there. It's here. It's all here. You know what I mean? I go to a comedy club no one's ever heard of, and there's tons of empty seats. And Kevin Hart just jumps in and does 10 minutes because he happens to be in town. I love driving by movies that are being made, people come here with their eyes wide open, and there's a downside to that. If you want to talk about how much this town sucks, I got a list for that too. But for the most part, I was enchanted by
That's a different
LA.
podcast.
Yeah, I'm not disgruntled, and I've been here 10 years. This is my 10-year anniversary. I've had a baby here. I have a daughter in LAUSD here, and the sparkle hasn't washed off. I really love it.
Yeah, I was never an LA guy until Nerdist. When I started listening to Chris Hardwick's podcast, and that's when I started hearing about the other side of LA, the real side of LA, not the glitz and glamour side, but the other group of professionals that work in the industry that aren't, make sure my publicist calls the newspapers and the paparazzi to meet me at the restaurant. So they're like, I've just came here. Why? How did you guys know I was gonna be here? There was this nerd melt and the theater. There's this other like cool performance group of people, and I started from a distance started falling in love with LA. And then I went to LA last year when you guys had that snowstorm.
Crazy.
I left Boston from a snowstorm, landed in LA, and it was snowing. Like I was like, what happened?
The hell? You're welcome.
I've seen snow in New Mexico, Dallas, Texas, and now LA.
It could be you. This could be you. You should talk to Marjorie Taylor Greene. Are you Jewish and liberal? Because you might be controlling the weather and you don't even know it.
If that was my mutant ability, that I was Storm from the X-Men this entire time.
Man, would have been nice to know, right?
I could have gone to a better school in New York than the public schools of Baltimore. But for me now, as an entertainer performer, my goal is LA because to me, that's the next logical progression. I'm very pragmatic. I like what you just told me where you're like, fuck it, let's go for a year. I could never do that. I gotta have a job. I gotta have savings. I gotta have a plan. I gotta be there. And a year is not knowing in my head, a year is not enough time to put a real actual plan together. It takes time. So you have to give it time. And then you probably, you get sunk in too long and now you're sunken costs. Like, do I cut my losses and leave, or do I continue to keep throwing bad money at good?
Yeah.
If I leave, does that mean that I didn't win? Like me, like the reason I moved away from Baltimore is this job in Boston opened up. It was more money. It was in the radio. It had more potential for everything. It had things that I needed, like healthcare. But really, ultimately, what it made me want to leave is that what's the best I can hope for living in Baltimore, doing radio and being a stand-up comedian is I become the best comedian in Baltimore. And we already have that guy, and his name's Mickey Cucella. So let me go to a city that I can develop in, and a city that's good for a stand-up comedy, and as Boston was, and make me a better comedian, and then I eventually work my way to New York or LA. Some of me wishes I would have went to Austin instead before Austin became the boom that it is now. Like I would have loved to have been pre-Austin 11 years ago and developed in that scene, in that territory. But here we are in Boston. Yeah. A small fish in a big pond that is Boston.
Yeah. Well, and to our earlier,
also not delicious to taste. So,
well, and like we talked about earlier with the curveballs and why you can't always anticipate what's going to happen. So you should just follow your bliss and do what makes you happy. So I moved to LA in October of 2014, and the landscape now as an actor is different. I don't know how Dawn coming into town in 2024 would react. Maybe it wouldn't be the same way, because one of the most significant differences is the audition process. I told you I could wake up in the morning, audition all day, and you'd never run out of audition. Especially if you're doing free student films, if you're like, I'll do any stupid fucking movie that they want to cast me in, as long as there's a set and a director and I get real at the end of it. Boy, I mean, you can just go to USC, UCLA, any of the film schools and just say, I have a theater degree, and girl, you will do movies all day, every day, The difference though now is that it's all self-tapes. Dennis, it's night and day. I mean, you'd wait in the morning, you'd get your audition notices. I'd send in headshots and a resume and a little description of myself. And then if they wanted to see me for the audition, I'd drive to Hollywood. There was one of 4 or 5 locations. where you'd have to drive around forever for parking. And then you go into these tiny little rooms, and some intern with an iPad or a camera would read the other side of dialogue with you. You know, you wait your turn and you'd be there for an hour or so, and you'd sit in the classic LA lobby where there's all different types of you waiting their turn. You know what I mean? To go in and read. Versions. Yeah. All the 30 something moms with red hair or whatever the thing you've responded to is. And then you'd go in and you'd read, and they'd say, you know, did you book the room? That means whether or not you get the job. Did they like you? Did the scene go well? Did you feel the little like zzz of like that worked, you know? And then you drive home past the Hollywood sign, and you get on the 101, and you go home and you worry or you wonder and you submit for more, right? That is not how it goes anymore. Since COVID and then I think subsequently with the strikes and how much rent is in LA, there is no professional or financial sense for anyone to own and operate an audition studio anymore. You record yourself at your house and you send in your audition tape, right? And the benefit to that is you don't have to move to LA anymore. You do, because they're not going to cast you if you don't live here, because they're not going to count on you flying in. You know what I mean? They've started asking when you say, here's where I live and here's where I'm recording from. So they really want you to say, because so many people are submitting from all over just to see. But you can submit for auditions from wherever you are, and you're reading alone. Maybe you have a husband or a roommate or someone you know who will read the other side of dialogue to you, but probably not. So what I'm often doing is reading my own cues into a pre-recorded thing so that I play back the other side of dialogue, which doesn't give me any room to improvise because those lines are coming when I recorded them and not when I'm done talking. You know what I mean? I have no direction. I'm making up what I think is the best way to do it. I'm also choosing what takes I submit, and I'm as vain as the next person. So I may be choosing the way my chin looked over the best performance just because I don't want to send the one with the hair was in my eye. You know what I mean? This is a completely different way of thinking. It's a completely different way of acting. It's a completely different way of casting. And I don't like it as much. And so maybe if I had pulled into my RV park in 2024 and started submit and was just sitting alone in my RV, recording myself and talking to myself, I might have said, I fucking hate LA. This place sucks. You know, I don't know. That was why I guess I had to do it in 2014, because you never know, right? It's not just about doing the thing you want to do. I do think there's power in doing it when it should happen.
I was purposely avoiding saying how we know each other. I talk about it a lot in podcasts. I just said it in the introduction, is that you are, as are many of my guests on the podcast, my my pandemic friend. Yes. And longtime listeners of the podcast are rolling their eyes and sighing right now because they're like, this again. And you are the one who brought it up, and the fact that it's true that COVID really did is still having such a huge effect on all our lives. Maybe not everybody, but for a majority of the people, especially actors, comedians, entertainers. I mean, I'm still dealing with I did an AV. I went back. I used to also do AV tech for a Jewish congregation. Mm-hmm. And I helped them do the live streaming for their high holiday services again this year. And this is the last time I told them, last time you're on your own. You got a guy who's qualified. I've taught him everything he needs to know. Lose my number. But we still have a mask-only section for the congregates who still feel that the necessary need to wear a mask in public. And it's the people who are wearing masks, not because they're like, oh, I'm sick, I have to wear a mask and sit in the mask section. It's the people of, I'm around a large gathering of people, I'm putting a mask on for defense, which is not how masks work, but that's another podcast. And that guy hosts that podcast called Joe Rogan. But we met through Flappers doing Zoom shows. And you did. I'm not gonna lie to you, Dawn. I hate when you call me girl, but I love that you call everyone girl. I love that is so you, is when you're just like girl. Let me tell you something about that girl, and I love it. That is so uniquely you, and it's so cool. But the first time you said girl, I was on a show. I was like, the fuck is this bitch talking? I
have a beard. She can see me, right?
But I love that's your dude. That's your dude. It's so
my dude.
Cool.
Yeah. Thanks.
So when the move to LA was inspired by the gentleman you were with at the time.
Yeah.
Is that present day husband or?
Yeah, we got married. Can you believe it? I mean, and that was
there was
the thing.
A part of it, well, you never mentioned it was your I went on to marry that man. You didn't mention, so I was like, oh no, is this going to step in his neck? You know, that son of a bitch went back to St. Paul. He gave up.
That guy sucks. No, as a matter of fact, this is what was so crazy. You know, you talk about what you think you know, and what you think you know, acting on assumptions, and why you should do it, even if your assumptions are wrong, is because part of the reason why we were like, yeah, let's do it for a year, was because I was a freelancer. So I knew there was a certain amount of jobs that I was not going to be able to do because I left the place where I did them, right? One of them, for example, not only the tour guide jobs, not only the Mary Shelley jobs, but I was the voice of a local grocery store chain. I was a corporate entertainer, so I did like corporate game shows and award ceremonies. That was very lucrative. I led drinking games on paddle wheel boats. I mean, so many jobs. And I was like, well, there are just enough jobs that are remote or whatever the version is, I can record. And I bet I could find jobs kind of like that when we get to LA, but I'm going to be sort of crossing my fingers that I can make enough money to pay my rent or pay whatever we're going to pay for this RV every month, right? But the fella who I was living with, his name is Andrew Melby. He has a name. He is my husband, but I like for the purposes of the story, because I didn't know any of this at the time, but he had a short contract with HGTV to shoot like a home and garden show out here. So he had like a job, and he was like, yeah, like I'll pay for us. Like I'll help us coast on this guaranteed job while you're trying to figure out how and if you can make money. And that's kind of what we'll be figuring out in that year is, can we do it? And do we like it? And by the end of that year, we'll either be hate LA or we'll be out of money. We'll have to come home, or we'll be doing it and want to stay, and we'll figure it out. So we moved out here in October, and he lost that job in December.
Oh no!
And
going back, there's no guarantees.
Exactly. And when I say lost that job, I mean it's television. Shows go. Mm-hmm. They just don't renew the show, right? So HGTV did do him right in the sense that they continued to hire him, but the jobs that he was doing were out of LA. So he went to New Jersey to shoot for 2 weeks, and then he'd go to Philadelphia to shoot for 2 weeks. Then he'd go back to the Twin Cities to shoot for 2 weeks. And I'm sitting alone in this RV in LA with no friends and no job. Like, what the fuck, man? You know what I mean? Like, is this what we came out here for? And you were the one who told me to come out here, and now you're gone all the time, We agreed to be a team. We're not a team. What's going on here? And in the meantime, but he's also like, but I promised you I'd pay the bills. And so I got to pay the bills by running all over the place, right? So I got the job as a tour guide, and it was summer, so it was full time. So I worked 40 hours a week, and I paid for and then he proposed. I said yes, because I'm not an idiot. So we're also saving for a wedding. It was going to be a very cheap wedding. We got married in a barn, but we're still trying to save for a wedding. And I remember the day, Dennis, I was sitting in the RV, and he was done with his contract in whatever city he was in. And his boss had said to him, well, next, we'll go home. We'll go back to LA for a couple days, and then we're going to go to Boston or some other city again. And I said, so that's it, huh? I'm like, is that kind of what we're doing? You're just going to like be bopping all over? And he's like, yeah. And I said, I got to be honest, babe. I feel like we jumped and you're holding on to a branch. Let go. Let's jump. We're jumping. Let's jump. We're in LA. Let's be in LA. Put your name out there, see what we can do, and let's just really try it here. And he was like, are you serious? I was like, yeah. I'm making enough at Universal for now, And he was like, okay. So he's like, so I'm going to tell him no, that I'm not going to go on the next city. And I was like, yeah, tell him no. And he was like, okay, oh my God, I'm going to tell him no. And I was like, tell him no. And he came back to LA and put his name out there and did the hustle and did the grind and all of his contacts and who can he meet. And it was weeks later that he got a job at Netflix, just holding the camera, doing some industrial video here and there. And then that started to pick up. And as you and I talked today, 10 years later, he is an executive at Netflix. He has worked his way up. He votes in the Emmys. He is a director level, like this guy. He went to the Minneapolis Community and Technical College. He left before he graduated. He just put himself out there. He proposes great ideas. He works incredibly, and he is working one-on-one with some of the biggest celebrities in LA on some of the hugest, coolest projects there are. I'm not in an RV. I live in a house, still in Van Nuys because I'm.
And if you're listening to the audio version of this podcast,
Exactly.
you can see Dawn's Van Nuys house
My Van
on
Nuys
YouTube
house.
at Big Comedy Network.
On the big company, exactly. And so that was one too, where like the idea is like when you take those big leaps in your life, the big chance of like, I have something secure, but what I want is over that treacherous gap. You know, there's this tendency to be like, okay, I hopped. And you're like, no, you got one foot in both, man. You didn't hop. You're standing astride a gap. That's not very steady ground, you know? Or like, I jumped off a cliff into the unknown, but you didn't. You landed on a little ledge that was also really safe. And you're really proud of yourself for taking a leap, which you should be. But did you? Like, could you jump again? Are you still falling, you know? And unfortunately, you know, there's no guarantees. Anything could have happened. And that word failure is hard to hear. It's hard to say. And if you think I could leap, but then what happens if it doesn't work? What happens if at the end of this year, I got to go back to the Twin Cities, tell everybody, yeah, I couldn't cut it, or I hated it, or you got to paint this picture like LA fucking sucks. Like I could have been Marilyn Monroe, but I just decided it was awful and I didn't like it, which also happens, by the way. People choose not to be there all the time. And now I have to go back to all these bosses I told to eat shit and ask them, please, could I have my job back? Yeah, that's scary. That's really scary. And if you really don't want to do it, then don't. Now you know. Now you've lived in the fullness of like what was out there and you made your their conscious choice. You only get one of these turns around, you know, life, man. And I'm 46 and I love my life and I love being 46. This is great and all these things, but like I'm a different person. I can't decide now to do what I did 10 years ago because I'm actually a different person. You know,
I mean, the thought of me getting in my car during the winter break between duck tour seasons, getting in my car, and this is the plan: is to spend 3 months on the road in my new to me 2013 Kia Soul,
amazing,
with my dog who is named Sister, and do shows across the country, hang out in LA, and then come back and start duck tour season over again, and keep doing that and doing that until I can save up enough money to actually move and make the move to LA and hopefully, you know, put all my efforts jumping off the cliff, as you say, into the efforts of LA. And it's so inspiring to hear that you know, people who have done that. I'm going to ask you something next that I'm going to preface with this. I hate that I have to ask this question.
Okay.
Because we should live in a world where me as a male and you as a woman, I don't have to ask you this question.
Okay.
But we are unfortunately in that world. And sometimes it's important to still to continue to keep talking about these issues so we can get past having these issues. And that one of the things is that the topic is that you have you and your husband both work in the industry.
Yes.
And now you have a daughter.
Yes.
And I'm so happy for you that you're still working in the industry, that you haven't given up your dream because you're like, fuck it, I got a daughter now. I gotta be a little more stable, or I gotta be home to be with my daughter all the time. So I guess I gotta stop doing that. Did you have to make, and trust me, this decision is so much more imperative for a woman than it is a man. Yes, men also sometimes have to make that decision too. And we're getting progressive enough in this day and age where some guys are going, hey, maybe I'll do less working and I'll be the stay-at-home dad. That's much more acceptable now, but it's still a very big reality for a lot of women. Me, who is terminally single because of this sparkling personality disorders.
Oh, you're a kid.
I don't ever have to worry about the kids thing, hopefully. But you do. So what was when the youngster came along, was there the conversation of, all right, how do we maintain my dreams while still providing for a life for this thing that whines and cries and shits itself and needs care 24 hours a day?
Yeah, girl. Well, I want to say, first of all, how grateful I am that you asked that question. It's a double-edged sword, I think, because on the one hand, there's the cliche that is that women are always asked, how do you manage to do it as a mom? And men aren't asked. And I think that that's a fair criticism sometimes of interviewers or media. But I also think that it's the reality is that women largely, true or not, stereotypically, fair or not, are the ones who have bear the literal burden of children. And it is harder to imagine how those things coincide with a professional life. So I guess there's several ways to answer that. One is, it is undoubtedly true that my professional life is starkly different and less, quote unquote, successful because I'm a mom. I would be lying to you, girl, and I'd be lying to myself if I said that there have been no lost professional opportunities. And that is just a fact. There's some I can point to. There's some that I can say that was a job I had, and then I became a mom and I don't have that job. Or things that seemed to be very, very cool and exciting and possible that just vaporized after I got pregnant. And some of it, and so that's true. And right now, presently, my daughter is 6. In the world of stand-up in particular, for me to be going full gas in the life of a professional stand-up comic, I would be spending 4 to 6 to 7 nights a week just sitting outside the Comedy Store. You know what I mean? At the Laugh Factory, at the Comedy Store, at the Improv, making TikTok videos, doing that thing where you're just getting as much stage time as possible. You're rubbing elbows with everybody. You're out till 2. And when you are home, you are writing and generating content and forward facing comment. That's kind of the route, right? Or I'm doing college tours. I would have auditioned and or submitted myself for one of the many sort of regional tours where you're doing college comedy and you're on a plane all the time and you're traveling around the country doing comedy in smaller venues. Or I'd be pushing the gas to get a booker who can book me on big shows, get me in headliners, get me on, that's the track. That's what you do. And I can't do that and be the mom that I need to be for my daughter right now. So that is a choice that definitely was the first time. And I didn't want kids for a lot of my life until I married him. I did want her. She was planned and wanted, but I didn't want
Let's make sure she doesn't listen to this episode.
Yeah. We've been clear. Yeah. I didn't want kids until I was 40, in part because I knew that it was a choice to live the life I wanted to live as a performer, actor, creative, or be the kind of mom that I would want to be. Couldn't do it at the same time. And the biggest hurdle, I told you about time, like the deal with the comedy right now is nothing. It's not as tied to money and mostly just tied to the finite amount of time there is. I can't put her to bed and I can't wake up with her at 6 o'clock in the morning if I'm doing that. And you know what I mean? This just doesn't work. But easily the biggest hurdle was money. It's really expensive to have a kid. You know what I mean? Set aside how much hospital is, it's just how much time and especially when you're in a place like LA, we don't have family here. I told you we came here without anybody, right? So childcare, good childcare, when you leave your precious child with someone that is going to take care of them, it should be at least $15 to $20 an hour. I don't want to pay someone less than that, which means whatever is taking me away from my child has to pay more than that. Or every hour I leave my child with someone is an hour I need to be making at least minimum wage so that I can just not have any money. No, that doesn't work, right? So the honest answer is when Melby got the high paying job at Netflix and I saw the potential for there to be comfort. I loved being freelance. I loved patching my life together. I liked the anxiety because it was just me. I told you I can eat ramen every day. I can... that's fine. But when you're making that choice for a kid, it starts to feel cruel. It starts to feel unfair. And Melby's income from Netflix was the first time that I saw an income that could allow me to pay for care and be an actress, to justify a nice, safe home and being able to continue to do creative things. Do you know what I mean? And it was possible. I thought, oh my God, I could hire a nanny. Now, it's still a compromise in the sense that I can't be Chelsea Handler right now, Yeah. But it was a compromise that I wanted to make because to our point earlier about bliss and following what makes you happy, being an actor, being a performer is it, but it quickly became Andrew Melby. I'm in love. And when I thought about having a child with him and having a human that we got to raise together, it made me so happy. It didn't feel like a compromise anymore. And it was the first time that I would have to compromise a bit, but not the whole thing. I wouldn't have to go work at Target, bless their hearts. I wouldn't have to, I wouldn't have to do a job that I hated. I might do less of the job I love. And that feels like a compromise, but I wouldn't have to do a job I hated. And I was lucky enough to have the baby. And then we have the second thing, which is it was easy for us to get pregnant, which is a blessing. We decided, let's try to have a baby. And bango, your friend Dawn was knocked up. So that is not always the case. Some people, that's part of the problem too, is now, oh shit, I want to have a baby so bad I can't. And that is very expensive if you want to try to get pregnant, right? Then I had the downside, which was a really traumatic birth. I was hospitalized with a postpartum infection days after my daughter was born, and I almost died. And then I had to have an emergency hysterectomy, and I almost died again. And now I'm completely fine. I am totally safe, but I can't have any more children, obviously.
You're fine, minus the ovaries. Yeah. You're all fine, minus the baby making part of your internal organs.
Yeah, exactly. The meat vase has been extracted.
All right, we're for everything between the porn and now the meat. And just to make sure your daughter never hears this episode's getting the 18 plus explicit
good
rating.
And meat vase. You can say meat vase at school.
It's clinical.
It's critical, right? But then, but this hero was sitting, man, with this baby, right? Fella's got a job and I'm doing great and I'm healthy again. And I got booked. I had my first killer main stage set at the Laugh Factory. I had just had this just amazing. I was being promoted. All these exciting things started to happen again. So then it was like, oh shit, man, this isn't even a compromise. I'm doing better in comedy with my baby than I had done before. This is amazing. And then COVID started. And all of a sudden, I'm at home with an 18-month-old. And it's not that I'm not doing comedy. Nobody is. There's no comedy. We start doing the Zoom shows. And it was man.
I always said that I enjoyed Zoom shows. I will defend them against everyone that said they suck. And while all of it was going on, people were like, it's different. You're telling jokes to people. What's the different thing? Just to get people into it. But there is... it's methadone for performance addiction.
That's how I describe it. It is. The way I described it is literally better than nothing. Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I also benefited. Well, professionally I benefited, but also it was Flappers owes me almost $4,000 in Flappers gift cards for working for them through the pandemic.
I believe it.
So
girl.
In my brain, that's still money.
Yes.
It's not money I can use anywhere except for, pizza and chocolate chip cookies at Flappers.
The food there is great. The food there is great. When you come into town, you're going to eat like a king. Yeah.
I did. My plan when I spent the week in LA last year before I quit my job and took duck tours, my plan was to eat at Flappers 7 days that week. I ate 3 days there.
That's great. You did very well.
And there was I had a couple shows booked, God bless Josh and them because, and first thing I did when I walked into the green was like, all right, who wants a drink? I'm buying. And nobody wanted to take care of my generosity. And I was like, guys, trust me. I'm buying, but I'm not buying. Have drinks. Yeah. I went through the whole night. I went to Hollywood Babylon after my show. Nice. I got a bunch more food and drinks and had a great time. And I'm buying drinks for everybody. And then I go to pay. And the manager, who doesn't know me, he wasn't a part of COVID, but he knew of me because of how much work I did for them. And he's like, Dennis, don't worry about your tab. It's on the arm. It's on us. You've done so much for us. I'm like, no. And I pulled my phone out with the gift card total. I was like, please charge me.
Yes.
Because I have to use this money somehow. Unless you're going to write me a check, use this gift card for my bill. He went, all right, I got it. I see where you go. All right, cool. I was trying to be nice, but I got you. All right, cool. No.
I love it. It's my favorite club. I love Flappers in Burbank. I just think it's the best. The people are great. Comedy's awesome. Food's delicious. It's best.
Yeah, I can't. I can't wait to go back and actually just sit in the place and just do the jokes, and I know other people have different opinions and everyone has their own opinion about what clubs they love, this, that, whatever. But I mean, I think during the pandemic, they did everything right that they could possibly do. Same thing with my friends at the Plano Comedy Festival. I think they were another people during the pandemic that did everything right. And I applaud them. And I was already familiar with Barbara Holiday, one of the owners there, because of the Boston Comedy Festival out here, because she's always a freaking presenter and doing workshops and stuff. And they were doing, for the Burbank Comedy Festival of 2020, they were doing a satellite audition here in Boston. I was supposed to be on it, and it got canceled because of COVID.
Shit.
Yeah. And that's when that's the reason why I started doing the online stuff with them, because she sent out an email to all the people who were supposed to be on the shows, like, hey, FYI, we're doing these Zoom shows. Just come perform on Zoom. And we're still going to try and figure this out. But I was like, all right, yeah, let me do the Zoom things with them. And they did it right. And I love that club. And maybe if I'm there, if I lived there and it was my home club, maybe my opinion would be different, because everyone has different opinions of their family.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, it's my home club and I still love them.
Yeah, I mean, every club has the people that love them and hate them. It's not, this is not, I'm not trying to secretly say something about flappers themselves. Every club has the people that love and hate them for whatever various reasons. Same thing with comedians, but I am also in love with flappers and everything they're doing there. But so, are you mad at Ali Wong that she got so much popularity for doing stand-up pregnant, and you've also done stand-up pregnant? And
oh my God, no, I love Ali Wong. It was funny though. She was her like big pregnancy stand-up was huge when I was doing my stand-up pregnant. And I used to make a joke that I know you guys are thinking, I didn't know Ali Wong was going to be here. And then I'd say, come on, guys, we don't all look the same. Because I am very clearly not Asian. That's the joke. That's the joke. Is that we're all pregnant women look the same. Yeah.
I had a gigantic double hernia on just above my belly button at the time. Like, it was the size of my fist.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And so when I was doing stand-up, I'd have to acknowledge it and just be like, this is my Baby Cobra special right here. This is going to give you my Netflix special.
Great. Love it.
So when did how and when did the History Channel as a talking head for them? How did that job present itself? If you tell me another newspaper classified ad, I'm like, was this also in 2004, 2001?
Yeah, no, not quite. But I will give it just enough. Pixie dust over this one. So my podcast is called HILF History I'd Like to Fuck. It is very irreverent. It is serious history, but it's from kind of an unserious point of view. And when I started it,
and I love your podcast, and I love your production. As a professional podcaster who worked on many, many podcasts as a producer, recordist, and my own podcast, you're doing an amazing job. I'm assuming you're doing all the editing and everything yourself. You're doing such a great job with all of it. Hats off to you. From one professional to the other, you're doing awesome work on it.
Oh, thank you. That really feels great, because it can be a very isolated kind of solo thing. And sometimes you're like, am I doing this right? It sounds good to me. It's the kind of podcast I'd want to listen to, but so thank you very much. And it is a labor of love too. If I haven't made it abundantly clear, I tend to, if I love something, baby, I do it. 2 feet. I open my mouth. I swim through that shit with my mouth open, right? And in the end of 2021, COVID was lifting, but I had found the joy in being alone with a microphone and doing things for people, but maybe not being in the room with the people that you're doing it for, And the HILF podcast came from there, which was, how do I trick people into letting me talk to them about history for a really long time? And it seemed like a good way to do that. And I also had a lot of luck in the sense that podcasting is a huge deal, but there's something about the niches within podcasting that if you can find a subject and a host that you really like, within mental health or a hobby or geography or whatever, like it can get a lot of attention. And so HILF had some good success right away. The first few people who liked it helped my algorithm and I got some good attention. And I actually was contacted by a producer from the History Channel for a show. The first show was called Crazy Rich Ancients, which was very funny. And it was, of course, a play on Crazy Rich Asians. But Crazy Rich Ancients was a short series about the extravagant wealth of history. So how the extraordinarily wealthy have made and spent their money throughout history, from Cleopatra to Napoleon, and so on. And it was great, and it was really fun. And I remember talking to the producer at that point and being very excited because, of course, the History Channel's the big show when you're a entertainer who loves history. Like, it is the pinnacle of sort of my two passions. So I was stoked to have them call. And I remember her saying, because I was trying to figure out, how did you get a hold of me? How did I even register to you? I didn't submit for this. And she said, I have your podcast theme song in my head right now. And so my understanding, they found me through the podcast, and I think they found the podcast through the niche of, history, funny, female led, if you're trying specifically to find a woman host, which is in the world of history, like many other sort of, there's a disproportionate amount of folks. So they look for women history, and there I was. And then they looked at the podcast and they thought that I would be someone who could fit for the show. And then after I contributed to that series, they contacted me again for History's Greatest Mysteries, which is hosted by Lawrence Fishburne and is really great show. It's a combination of Lawrence Fishburne's narration with reenactments and graphics, and then they cut to historians, talking heads who can speak to the moment or the whatever. And I think at this point I've lost track. I did actually 3 more episodes last week, so I want to say that I'm up to like 15 episodes of History's Greatest Mysteries now that I've appeared on, and it is great. It's so fun. It's a perfect marriage. They love me because I'm a historian who can do a retake, without sounding like I'm doing a retake, I can have
that ability as an actress, which, by the way, the History Channel really is the perfect place for you to land. With the exception of Drunk History. I don't know how you didn't get on Drunk History.
It's crazy. So here's the line. So one of the guys who used to work on Drunk History works with me now at Universal. I'm no longer a tour guide at Universal. I'm a street improviser. So I up in what's called the New York windows, and we talk down to the people on the street, and we improvise with each other and the people on the street. And one of the guys I improvise with was a producer on Drunk History. And I was like, God, and he's like, it's such a bummer that show isn't around anymore, because I really just kind of missed it. You know what I mean? Yeah. But it was how I made the acquaintance of Jim Jeffries, who I know because you have interviewed him, of course. But he is a huge comedian from Australia, and he has a podcast called I Don't Know About That. And I emceed for him in a comedy show, and his producers were like, wait, you're a historian? Really? I said, yes. And you're on the History Channel? I said, yes. And so they invited me to be a guest expert on his podcast. And that sort of, snake eating its own tail, that really fed HILF and gave HILF a real shot in the arm, because a lot of Jim Jeffries' audience is wonderful and loyal and liked me and hopped over to HILF and have never really left, which is great. And so there's this lovely, sort of self-feeding ecosystem where the podcast gets me on the History Channel, which gives me the, credentials to be invited onto other things, which brings more attention to HILF, which and so your garden grows is the idea.
Wow, that's awesome to hear that you got into those avenues of it, and that the podcast is providing that space for you. So, yeah. And I will say, yes, Jim has been on the podcast, and that's because Jim is generally one of the nicest people I think I've ever had an opportunity to talk to. Like there's one of the things, it's an audio only episode of the podcast because his PR rep, they do this to me all the time. The PR people that reach out to me for things when I was like, well, let's do the podcast. And they're like, they're all anti-podcast, So when him and I started, as soon as he got on the phone, I was like, hey, cause it was supposed to be a print interview. And I was like, hey, can we also use this audio as a podcast? He's like, oh man, I didn't know this was also supposed to be I'm not going to do a Jim Jeffries impression. I didn't know this was also a podcast recording. I got puke all over my shirt. Do you want to reschedule? And we can do video. And I was like, no, I have you now. Let's just do it as is. He's like, all right, man. Like he was so super nice. And I mean, he's one of the few people that like after recording's done, we just talked and had, just good conversation with him. He's such a super nice guy. I'm glad you got to meet and work with him. I'm glad that
couldn't say a bad word. He's such a nice guy. He's one of those, I've met like really kind of high profile people over the years. And I would say that he's one of the few who is exactly the same guy that you see on stage that you talk to backstage. Like he is with you. He's not an egomaniac. He's funny. He's irreverent. He wants to keep talking with, nice guy. Real, genuine dude.
Yeah. All right. Cause I've been beneficial of having to work along a lot of very famous people because of my work in radio and now comedy and acting and all this stuff. And you know who surprisingly was nice that I hate to admit they were nice?
Who?
JWoww from the Jersey Shore.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
We did a club event with her for the radio stations I used to work at in DC. And I wanted to hate her. Because I hate the show. I hate all of it. I wanted her to be a diva bitch. And she was not in any way, shape, or form. She was not just nice to her fans. She was nice to me.
Yeah.
And I was just like, stop making me like you, JWoww.
Yes. Come on. I have a certain stereotype that you need to live up to. Or live down to.
I need to be a curmudgeon, all right? And hate everything that is you. Will you fall in line, please?
That's great. That's great. You'd rarely hear a story of someone that you thought would be a dick was really nice. I think that's great. It's a good twist.
So where can everybody find everything that is Don Brodey and HILF Podcast?
Oh, well, thanks again for having me. It's always a joy to talk to you. You probably would have best on Instagram. If you go to Don_Brodey, Brodey, you will find the link tree. You'll see everything I'm doing currently. So if you're in and around LA, you want to see where I'm performing, that's always where things are the most current. I have a website, donbrody.com. I am woefully, I used the website. Remember we talk about technology and back in the day, like the website was everything, but then social media, it's like, why would you bother going to a website? And then you're like, okay, now I get it. You kind of go to the website, the archive. Anyway, you can just see a lot of reels. If you want to see all the commercials I've been in, you can go to donbrody.com. And HILF Podcast, HILF Podcast is available everywhere you listen to podcasts. So you can find it Spotify, Apple, streaming all over YouTube. There's no video, but you can listen to it on YouTube. And I also have an Instagram, HILF Podcast, its own deal. So you can see the photos that go with the current episode that's out. And that's me, man. And then if you want to see all of the history's greatest mysteries, usually if I know that they're out, I will have those linked on those social media pages. Otherwise, the good old fashioned way, you go to IMDb and you look for Don Brodey, and that's usually where I go because I don't know what episodes have been released and what hasn't. And if it's on IMDb, then it must be out there somewhere.
The people working for the network, Big Comedy Network, have been putting my episodes on IMDb. So now I've also made them tag the guests who have IMDb. So I can go through myself and tag that. So you're also going to get a credit on your IMDb that says you were on So What Do You Really Do?
Hey, girl. The big time.
Excellent. Dawn, it was great having you on. I'm glad we was able to schedule and make this happen. And next time you are in Boston, you and your sister have free tickets to take my duck tour. And hopefully this winter, at the beginning of the new year, if my Kia Soul does not break down between here and LA and I get stranded in the middle of nowhere, I'll be in LA and hopefully we'll be able to schedule time and hang out and actually verify that we both have legs.
Please do. Come out to Van Nuys. I'll show you a good time.
Awesome. Great job.
Thank you.